Basciano. Marcia is one of our past presidents of the IAOMT, and she's worked in this field of the impact of what we're doing in dentistry on the environment for many, many years. She's been a member of the IAOMT since I was just born in 1984, and a member of IAOMT's environmental committee since that point. She's spoken to audiences all across the United States on this topic and has actually authored a chapter in a book that deals with the environmental impact of dentistry. So would you please join me in welcoming Marcia Basciano.
Thank you, Stuart. And we have a small group today, which is really nice. I really like that. And some of the groups that I have spoken to have been the Academy for General Dentistry, the American Association of Women Dentists, and they're a little bit of a harder sell, but we started one year talking to them about the environment, and then the next year talking to them about safe dentistry for the staff. So someday we'll advance to safe dentistry for the patient. But I will do my disclaimer. I do not have any financial interest in any product in my talk or any companies offering grant monies for this continuing dental and medical education program. Why are we having an environmental impact talk this time and the same talk again in September presented by Paul Rubin? As you know, Rich Fisher had spoken to you right before the lunch break today about UNEP and all the excitement that's happening. There's a series of speaking or conferences across the world. We've had them in Japan, and we will have one in South Africa coming up later this year. And what is happening is there is a group of environmentalists as well as lay groups that would like to stop having mercury in dental and medical devices. And of course, dental amalgam falls into that catch of dental and medical devices. So we wanted to have a basic course again. Of those of you who have done the Thursday course may have seen some of this, but I try to put a little different twist on it. The Academy, of course, as Stuart had said, has quite a background in having environmental issue interest. And in 1985, we even had a wastewater engineer from Pima County, Arizona, speak to us, and he was talking about how dental offices were found to be dumping too much mercury into the river there, and they had to close down the offices. They thought at first it was the hospitals, where indeed it was the dental offices. And over the years, we have spoken to many groups. We've given information to Mark Richardson when he was with Health Canada to get his risk assessment for Canada. We have given information as well as funds to Mercury Policy Project, Michael Bender. We have been present at numerous conferences, both with wastewater engineers as well as environmental groups. We have been on the Hill with the House Committee on Oversight and Environmental Reform, speaking about dental amalgam on the environment. And again, today, these days, we're sending representatives. Graham Hall and Dave Simone were, as well as Lillian, got her last name, from the Philippines, were all in Japan representing the IAOMT and talking to different countries about how important it is to stop amalgam and how it is not necessary to have in dentistry anymore. You're going to learn several things today, and one is what are the latest arguments to continue mercury fillings, because unless you know the arguments, you can't be prepared with the retort. You're going to learn about why these arguments aren't viable arguments. We're going to, in talking about that, we're going to see the avenues which dentistry pollutes the environment, and lastly, how you can make a difference. And so there's a whole mishmash of groups that is working to stop mercury use in dental and medical devices as a catch overall. One is in Canada, of course, UNEP, World Health Organization, Zero Mercury, etc. And there's a whole cry out there finally to stop mercury. We realize mercury is a global problem from a lot of industries, and medical and dental do their part in contribution. However, there's strong resistance. We know that in Canada, they have prohibitions about what can be allowed and Now they are saying as of February 2011, a person must not manufacture, import, or sell anything with mercury in it. However, they gave an exemption to dental amalgam with no mercury limit. And what is their thoughts for this? They claim that the product plays an important role in the protection of human health and the environment. Now, let's put aside that we all know that's not true. They also claim there's no technical or economically feasible alternative. Well, tell all the cosmetic dentists that. Tell dentistry that since probably 1992 that we do have viable alternatives now. And, excuse me. There was one more. I guess it didn't copy right. Excuse me. And then there was a letter sent to the Bureau of Oceans by the alphabet soup of dental organizations, the Academy for General Dentistry, Pediatric Dentistry, Periodontists, Oral Surgeons, Orthodontists, and of course your ADA. And they, in that letter, said that the technology and the practices exist already to minimize the impact of dentistry, mercury on the environment. They said it was important that we at least have the BMPs, which is the basic steps that you need to do in your office that the ADA even has on their website to protect the environment, like separators and not throwing things down the drain, at least for a generation. And we'll see why it's a lot longer than a generation that we will need that. They said that they particularly hope that we keep on the task of the important topic of public health, and that we have public and oral health experts on the panels. And we need to promote public health at home. And obviously they're trying to have us not look at mercury in the environment, but talk about how to keep less cavities in kids' teeth. Also the point that they're talking about public and oral health experts. If we're talking about environment, we're talking about toxicologists and environmentalists who should be on these panels, not dentists. And again, they also say that we already have a small environmental impact from dental amalgam, and we'll see that it is not a small impact, especially in the last 10 years when every other industry has stepped back, even the big chlor-alkali industry, and has decided not to use mercury in their processes. So let's examine, with proven medical, environmental principles as well as substantiated facts, does dental mercury impact the present generation only? Is it really a question about public health? Do we have the technologies and practices in place to protect the environment from dentistry? And is it truly a small impact from dental mercury? And I want you to forget the risk that you have as a dental staff member. I want you to forget the risk that your patient has having amalgam fillings in their mouth for just a moment and think just about environmental issues. We know environmental reasoning is the surest path to dental mercury death. That is why it is no longer used in the Norwegian, Sweden, Norway, Finland. We know environmental issues are hot in the media. It's a good way to get coverage very quickly. We know that there's a tremendous volume of research about mercury in the environment already, and it is proven to be correct. And we know that networking among environmentalists is already established. So we're trying to tag on to something that's easier to prove other than saying that a patient is harmed by having mercury fillings in their mouth. If we can stop using the mercury, either way, it works. We're talking about environmental science. It's also important to get public support. In a Zogby poll, which is the type of poll that is the benchmark for correctness in the United States, we helped pay for the findings of the 2005 poll. And in the Northeast America, we found out that 76% of Americans didn't know that mercury is the main ingredient in dental amalgam. But we know that close to half of Americans know that mercury poses a serious problem for the environment. So if we could connect those two thoughts with the public, then we may get a little more background, even if it comes down, or support, even if it comes down to a patient coming into the dental office and saying, I don't want those have mercury in them, and get a little less in the environment that way. Public health is certainly an issue. The University of Texas did a study, and they said for 1,000 pounds of environmentally reduced mercury, there is a 43% increase in the rate of special education services and a 61% increase in autism. Now, they did not specify how environmentally released, whether it's water or air or land, but again, public health is the issue when we're talking about dentistry and mercury. Again, let's talk about the avenues by which dentistry pollutes the environment. Dentistry, as of in 2004, consumed 14% of the domestic usage of mercury. Now, I just heard from Pierre yesterday. He was reading something on the plane coming here, and I guess half of the mercury that's imported to Canada this past year, its use was for dentistry. So dentistry has risen in the amount of mercury that it uses percentage-wise, because all the other industries, think about it, you don't have the eye wash solution with mercury in anymore, your batteries don't have mercury anymore, whole hospitals have gone mercury-free with sphygmometers, thermometers are banned in many states. So what we're looking at is that dentistry is having a larger impact. Dental clinic wastewater is one way that we enter the environment, comes from your office. And again, it comes from dental amalgam placement. You have the scrap amalgam that gets suctioned up and put up the tube into your sewer. You have amalgam removal, of course, that most of us do, and that also goes up your into your sewer. And then we have the cake sewage lines. Even if you buy a practice from another dentist that used to do dentistry, those lines are caked with amalgam, and as water passes through it, you get more mercury into the water. So let's say you are an orthodontist, you'll never use mercury, but you bought an old practice, you could be still polluting the environment. So I question you, is this a small impact? Is it a small impact when we have 40–60% of mercury in the New Jersey harbor as a result of discharges from dental offices? Wastewater engineers tell us that the greatest contributor to mercury load, an average of 40%, is dental offices. And it's hard to think of dentistry as an industry when it's so many individual little offices. But collectively, we do make a difference. We don't have a small impact when we talk about industrial is only giving 5–10% of the mercury in the environment, residential 15–20%, and dental sources 76–80%. Again, this is North America. If you talk about China, those numbers would be a bit different. We'd have coal production as probably by far the largest, and dentistry much lower because there's not as much dentistry is done there up to today. Residential would be coming from people throwing things out that have mercury in them, as well as something we'll talk about with waste in the wastewater from there. That's a good question. Pardon me? Tennis shoes that light up. Oh, when I went to one conference for an environmental group, they even had all kinds of things that had mercury in them. I'm not sure why they would have it at the conference, but one of the things was used in voodoo. And they use mercury in voodoo practices. And some of the people from Florida have had to confiscate that. So that was kind of interesting. Technologies and practices do not exist, really, to protect the environment. Our wastewater treatment plants vary greatly. There's only a few that are really up to snuff or up to technological advancement. They can handle even the heavy metals. But the heavy metals cannot be they're not biosludge. You can't put bacteria on them and break them down like you can all the other stuff that's put into the wastewater. You have to separate it out and become sludge. And what happens with the sludge is if it doesn't have too much mercury in it, it gets put on the land as a fertilizer and then gets reintroduced to the environment. It can be sold as energy bricks and burned off. And so then the mercury again goes into the environment, and or it can be dumped in a landfill. So again, we're trying to stop the global existence of mercury use because there's so little control over it. We don't have a small impact when we think about there's 1,000 tons of mercury in the mouths of Americans, more than half of the mercury currently used in the United States. That is called the human inventory. And in Europe, we have approximately 500 million citizens. They say have 50–75% of the individuals have fillings in their mouths, and they estimate 1,100 tons can be found in people's mouths in the European Union. Now, I don't call that a small impact. I don't call that a reason to have just a generation of practices to protect the environment, because when you think about it, those fillings aren't going to last just a generation. We've all seen fillings that have lasted 40, 50 years. And in a moment, we'll see how else that they can impact the environment while they're in people's mouths. One way is after death. If you think about it, when you burn a body, you're also burning those amalgam fillings, and they go up the stack. And unless you have a very good scrubber on the stack, which is not very often, you put that mercury into the air. And so what we're seeing is that in cremation and even in burial, where there has been shown that mercury gets into the water system, the water plane, that we will have contamination that way. So I don't call that technology there available. I don't call that a small impact, and I don't call that a reason to have the basic practices just for a generation. And I threw this in because in a moment we shall talk about feces. And what we basically have is, with this human resource of mercury in the mouth, we have pollution every day from patients that have, all of us who have mercury in our mouths. As we know that mercury comes out in the feces and the urine, sweat, and all of that goes down the toilet into the wastewater system. And there's not separators in every home like there is in hopefully in a lot of dental offices. And so what we're seeing is a large impact on the wastewater system to have more sludge, more mercury in the sludge. We see it as an impact as to beyond the generation that you put the mercury in. We also see Swedish claim that there was enough excretion of mercury in a relatively small country with a small population of Sweden to be equal to a modern chlor-alkali plant. And chlor-alkali is used to be the standard as the biggest way to find out what mercury does to the workers, what mercury does to the environment. And now, again, chlor-alkali plants have been revamped, at least in the United States. By 2012, they're supposed to be all closed or totally revamped. So I don't call that a small impact. I don't call that a reason to have, again, protection for just a generation. Wastewater treatment plants cannot protect us from what goes down your sewer in your homes, in your offices. I don't call it a small impact because mercury on the environment has what's called, as we all know who took basic biology, a biological magnification. It magnifies the mercury's effect on the ecosystem 5,000 times. Now, what does that mean? It means that the small fish gets mercury in its system from the environment. The next biggest fish eats that small fish. And then if you want to be kind of nearsighted, you could think about it only in terms of our safety. We can't eat that large fish because there's that much more mercury in the muscle of the fish. Again, mercury also can affect the environment. It can affect phytoplankton, which is, again, as you know, the basic of the environmental ecosystem. As low as 1 part per billion of mercury can inhibit photosynthesis of phytoplankton. So we're looking at a lot of different things in this system. So if we look at the biological magnification, that pretty much happens with any material. It builds up in the muscle of the larger species. However, if we look at mercury in a very special way that only mercury has, which is called methylation, we know that mercury usually goes into the wastewater or into a ecosystem as mercuric salts or elemental mercury, and then bacteria. It can be anaerobic and aerobic. It can happen in alkaline or acidic water. It can happen in the soil, or it can happen in near the surface. It can happen on the gills of the fish. Mercury is turned into methylmercury, which then increases the toxicity of a amount of mercury 85,000 times. And that is why the EPA refers, I apologize, there's part of the slide that didn't copy. She didn't, there's a part of this that didn't copy. Hold on one second. Let's see if I could get it this time. No. That's why the EPA refers to it as a persistent bioaccumulative toxin, and it's the only heavy metal that has that elite term. There's some very nasty metals or chemical compounds that have that term, and the only heavy metal that has that term is mercury. We know methyl mercury, again, is usually discharged as mercuric salts, but is turned into the more toxic methyl mercury in the ecosystem. We found that out in the 60s in Japan, and poor Japan seems to be getting all the things. They had the Minamata Bay disaster where mercury got into the Minamata Bay, and it was spilled as elemental mercury, and they found methyl mercury in, of course, the cats, who started to become the strangers first, and then the people. And they finally realized in the 60s, a few Danish researchers realized that the methyl mercury was the issue and that methylation does happen in the system. It is so interesting, methyl mercury, that you can take 1 teaspoon of elemental mercury, and because of this exponential increase in toxicity, you will contaminate a lake that is 18 square miles, that you will have to put a sign in there that says no eating of the fish. And we know there's mercury in every river system in the United States of today, every lake. It's just a matter of how much is acceptable to be able to eat the fish. Yes? I would just like for cremated, they would go down into the soil or in the water or to the animal that ate them, and then it would be recycled. It doesn't go away, unfortunately. Yeah, that's a very good point. And again, methyl mercury is part of the reason it's more toxic is because it's more lipid soluble. It accumulates in the brain better. So I don't call that a small impact. I don't call it a small impact when the EPA, if I took all these numbers of common dental ingredients and I looked at what the EPA would be accepted as to an okay level in the wastewater system before they'd say, gosh, you really have a problem. And nickel is 88,000 parts per trillion. We go down to cadmium. Of course, you'd expect that to be worse. It's actually worse than lead by quite a bit, and it's 2,000 parts per trillion. I don't think they use cadmium anymore. They did when I was in dental school and after in pink coloring of the dentures and so forth. But mercury, look at mercury. It's 12 parts per trillion, and that is an unbelievable small amount that is accepted in the environment, and we call that a small impact. Something that has been researched by Paul Rubin, who is on the environmental committee, is the air that comes out of exhaust systems in some dental offices with their vacuum system. And he figured out with a epidemiologist and with a statistician how much of that can be extrapolated throughout the United States. And he figured that as much as a ton of mercury is dispensed into the air by dental offices in the United States. There is no technology right now by any separator company or anyone else that can keep that amount down without losing suction on your vacuum system, which is unacceptable to us dentists. So we don't even know how much this is going to impact the environmental amount that we put out, even if we were to put a separator on each system. And in a moment we'll talk about the restrictions of separators as well. So this study has been repeated by another researcher and has found the same numbers, but nothing else has been done with it right now. One of the problems you'll hear about, and the ADA likes to talk about, is they'll be talking about dental mercury waste, but then all of a sudden switch to air exposures or air amounts in the United States. And That amount is very little in the United States. As I said, it's mainly in China, and they'll like to switch to that, and you have to watch that when you read their articles, because they'll switch from air to water, and right now water is what we're talking about in the United States. Someday maybe we will talk about the air. So let's learn about how we can make a difference. And basically you want to stop mercury pollution at its source, which is the dental chair. And of course the first one is not place any more mercury fillings, which we all pretty much do. But again, if we do take them out, we have the same risk of dentistry or mercury coming out of our offices. Sweden was the first to legislate dental mercury, and again it was done for environmental reasons as early as 1979. The United States pretty much got on the bandwagon in the late 80s, early 90s, especially Seattle, Minneapolis, Duluth, and they were forefront runners for testing different separator systems. In fact, in Seattle, they started with an environmental, having dentists just voluntarily get separators. And of course, after 1 year in 1990, if you can imagine what was 21 years ago, how little the environmental meant to a lot of people compared to maybe today, there was less than 1% dentists that would get a separator on their office. One of our members, Paul Rubin, got a separator in his office, and he sent out a press release, got a lot of new patients from it that were, again, in Seattle. You have a lot of environmentally sharp patients, as well as getting the Governor's Award that year. So he got a little bit of marketing out of it as well. So if you don't have a separator in your area now, and it's voluntary still in your area, although at the end of 2012, I believe it's going to be mandatory throughout the United States, it might be time to get one, and you could get a little more mileage out of it. Up until October 2007, the ADA flatly came out and said, we don't need separators. We just need basic management, best management practices, what they call it, in order to keep mercury out of the systems. In 2008, they said that, okay, or in 2007, they said, okay, we need separators, but it's going to be voluntary. And they actually committed to a voluntary, they actually got in bed, if you will, with the EPA and said, we want only voluntary compliance. And now that has been reversed. There's fighting to get it reversed again back to voluntary compliance, but the EPA for some reason has had enough and said, no, we're going to go ahead and make you have separators in the United States. So on ada.org actually is, even if you're not a member, it is a very good resource for separators, comparing them, the cost, as well as what best management practices is. And I did not put that in the slides for time reasons, but it's pretty very basic know-how. And again, you can get as much as a training video and all that, but again, it's very straightforward. The IAOMT.org also has some information. They will have they have some past PowerPoints about the environment that you could go back on and have a lot of this information on. So we're telling you not to have separator anxiety. We're telling you that it does work to a certain extent. You can have 86% reduction of mercury discharge in sewer systems with separators. Toronto found that 73% of the offices, they reduced it by 58%. We know that 1/4 to 1/2 pound of mercury is captured per dentist, and again, is not separated out to dentists who use it or not use it. Some of these numbers were before the cosmetic offices opened in greater numbers as they are now, and so I would say most of this is when more dentists were using amalgam. And you can get 95 to, I will correct that, 99% capture possible with a dental office source. But no, there are studies that have shown that unless you maintain the separator, unless you have a good separator, you will not be catching what you think you're catching. So separators are not the end-all. They are a help. There's not a reason not to have them, but they're not the end-all. You want a separator that's 99% effective or better, and they are there. They are out there. And I'm saying 99% because even if your area says they want 95% right now, know that they're going to up it, because the federal government has mandates on the wastewater engineers to lower the amount of mercury in their sludge, lower the amount of mercury coming out of their systems, and they are under the gun for it. You want one installed centrally. You could have 10 rooms. You want one. You only want to pay for one, and they will adjust the size for it. You want one that proper recycling provided, which also goes with that paper trail on the bottom. You want the manufacturer to tell you where that mercury went, who it was sold to, and what was done with it, and the amount of mercury in your separator when you sent it in. In about 1965, there was a group of dentists that, if some of us remember when we used to send in mercury through the dental auxiliary, and they made money to help teach kids how to brush their teeth. And you're smiling, he did that. And they sent, about 20 dentists sent their mercury in, and the mercury was sold to a businessman, if you will, in eastern United States. And he was quite sloppy. He would take out the silver, which is why they want the mercury scrap, but he then just dumped the mercury on the ground. And the end result was a Superfund cleanup that cost about $600,000. Well, who paid for it were the dentists, because they were the ones that supplied the mercury. That's the way the law works. So make sure you have proper paperwork. Did he go bankrupt? That's probably true, and that's the way the law works. Or you get everybody you can, just on the first, you shoot them all. Which reminds me, before I go on with this, it's interesting that even after death, you have mercury going into the environment. There was, if many of you might remember, the news release several years ago about the Georgia crematorium. And he was not identifying the bodies, and he might give dog bones to the families that thought they were getting, or ashes, that they were getting the ashes of their loved ones. And basically he was called to court, and he was sued for a lot of money, and for, of course, also having all kinds of hazardous cleanup for a lot of different objects and things around his property. And his legal stance was that he was mercury poisoned from the smoke from his crematorium. Now, I don't know how much it bought him, but that was his stance. He had a sharp lawyer who knew that. So that was interesting. You want it quiet. We have enough noise going on in our offices. I don't know about you. I don't have a basement. I have a small room in the back, and that's where all the noise is, and you don't want it to be adding to the noise. You want a hands-off operation, which is pretty much all of them today. In the old days, the first ones out, you would send your dental assistant. You wouldn't go down there. You would go to your dental assistant, would go to your separator and empty it out every day, decant it off, and so it wouldn't overflow. And that is no longer done, of course. You don't want any compromise of chairside suction. Again, the early ones did that. I understand some of the European ones still do that. You don't want it to overflow. You want it to make sure that you don't get it all over your carpet when maybe you're spewing a lot of water in there, one right after another. All your dentists in your office are working at once. You don't want it to overflow. And again, that was a problem with some of the early ones. That means that you don't want, when your separator is attached to your suction before it goes to the sewer line, you don't want to notice that when you're suctioning out of the mouth that it doesn't work as well. And the early ones, by putting that extra line in there, meant that it didn't suck up that water as fast as you wanted it to. I haven't found that in any since 1991 when I got mine, but some of the early ones were like that. There's two kinds. There's one that goes to the end result right before your sewer line leaves your office. That is where the true separator goes. Some of the separator companies were selling them to go chairside as well, which was kind of overkill because you already have a trap that you should be using best management practices to get rid of, and then putting another trap in. But to trap it chairside as well as right before you go through the sewer was kind of overkill. Is that what you're thinking of? I imagine over time you would have some on your, that would be closing your lumen or your size of your pipe over the years. But again, you would have to change out those pipes. Nowadays you can change out pipes a lot easier than the old iron pipes. 5 minutes? Okay. And you want also, the cost can vary. Again, you want to know what it's going to cost to change the filter, and what kind of time frame do they suggest to change the filter, what it's going to cost to, are you sending the whole unit in, do you just change or you just check the filter? So we have a very timely thought about here, and I thank Pierre LaRose for this. He brought up that there are two the most toxic elements on Earth, according to the University of Tennessee toxicity scale. One is our very familiar in the environment media today, plutonium. And the next is mercury. And perhaps right now mercury should be in the headlines along with the plutonium. It's a little more insidious, a little more chronic, but again, it can be just as deadly. So what we're asking is to stop using mercury in dentistry. We're asking so we don't add to that human resource of fillings. We are asking for compulsory separators and BMPs practices in dental offices. We're asking for improved wastewater treatment plant technology so that they can do something different with the sludge. They can perhaps even capture things more at sources of where there might be a concentration of people with more mercury. We're asking that filters on smokestacks become a better way to capture, and crematoriums. Again, cremation is growing in the United States. In Europe, it's pretty much the way things are done because of the land. So we're getting a bigger problem from that in the United States. It's I'm sorry, Marcia? Best medical practices. Mm-hmm. It's a requirement in the Academy that all accreditation candidates provide evidence of amalgam separators. We feel that strongly about it, and we strongly recommend that all members of the Academy be setting the standard and have an amalgam separator. And I apologize for some of the slides. We downloaded my flash drive instead of using the original flash drive, and I won't do that again. This isn't arguing about numbers. You can micromanage this whole presentation, but I'd like you to walk away from it in knowing it's an opportunity for dentists to make a contribution to the environment. And if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, if you want a copy of the PowerPoint, I'm very generous with my PowerPoints, or our PowerPoints, I should say, then I would be happy to send it to you. And if you want to give the PowerPoint to a group in your area, that'd be great. And this is a day late, but I would like you to know that we did have respirators in Ireland many years ago, and they were green. So thank you.